Good afternoon, beautiful people. It is the Sunday show on the line. Seth Andrews, Paulogia, with you as well. Paul, it's always good to see you, brother. How you been, my friend?
Always a pleasure. I've been all right. We haven't seen each other in person so far this summer, but it's always good to see you, even on the screen.
I'm coming up
and
to Canada. It's funny. I'm going to Canada is such a stupid thing to say, right? As if Canada is like a neighborhood. Oh, I'm going to be in Canada, Paul.
Right.
But I'm going up
I'll swing
for
by.
the BajaCon event. What part of Canada roughly do you live in? Are you close to Sarnia, Toronto, any of those places? No?
So not particularly. I'm in Nova Scotia, which is basically east and south of Maine.
Nah, you guys are way
weirdly
on the wrong side. So.
Yeah, we're just Hurricane Alley.
There's June's going to be a busy month. In fact, let me pull this up real quick. A lot of people have been asking about events that are going on. I'm getting ready in a couple of weeks to go. I'm one of the speakers, and I'm doing a workshop at the Secular Student Alliance. And I love the SSA because I think it sounds really corny, but I mean, they mark a specific generation of people who are going to be decision makers, sort of the rule makers, the people who are the trend setters. And so the idea that we are seeing an entire generation of people from promoting secular values is huge. And I was so honored because for the first time in 15 years of activism, they said, Seth, would you like me to come up? Would you like to come up and speak? And so I'm doing a speech called Seth Andrews versus God. Who is the better intelligent designer? And it's a fun one. It's just so much fun to do. So anyway, that event's coming up in 2 weeks, June 14th, 15th, 16th at the University of Arkansas in Little Rock. Some other events. I'll skip all the ones I'm in. You can just go to my website, sethandrews.com for those. But the BajaCon Blue Water Atheist Humanist, that's in August. Kentucky Free Thought, that's going to be happening in September. The FFRF, the Freedom from Religion Foundation. That national convention is the last weekend in September. And I think those are the major ones. If you don't know, if you know of one rather that I haven't heard of, let me know, Seth at sethandrews.com, and I'll add it to the website and see if we can get the word out. Of course, Paul, this is the part where people are like, well, y'all are just going to atheist church. This is just a religious exercise. Have you heard that particular position, Paul? Have you heard the protest?
I have,
from
absolutely. And it's all in this strange besmirchment of you're also religious. So therefore, kind of acknowledging that in some way the label religious is embarrassing or lesser than or whatever, trying to drag us down. But we do
it's
need
a strange protest.
It is, absolutely. We do need to do community better, though.
But I think your religion is no better than our religion is it's a weird defense of their religion, right? Because essentially they said we're the equivalent. So I'm a believer in community, especially for those, I think, who, they've left a community that was a theist, a spiritualist community, and they're looking for people. The fact that I think life is better when it's shared. I don't buy this idea that getting together and hearing, whether they're scientists, philosophers, activists, humanists, entertainers, comedians, musicians, etc., at these events is religious. That's just stupid. And it's probably the biggest attraction to conventions, conferences, local groups, whether it's skeptics at the pub or drinking with atheists or a regional conference or a big national event, is that you get to hang out with other people who aren't patting you on the head and treating you like some broken thing. And you and I both came out of a hardcore fundy religion. I'm sure you felt that, right? Oh, we just need to show Paul the love of Jesus. I'm sure you've been through that in your own life. Yes?
Well,
No?
and I also had the opposite. I was diagnosed with quite a serious illness shortly after I deconverted, and I got quite a bit of we need to shun this person, and this is God teaching them a lesson, and God will, yeah, you either punish Paul or bring him back based on this. So I mean, but absolutely. So it was, I had both the shunners and the lovers. So I appreciate the people who stuck by me, but yeah,
It's
it's always a weird
interesting. That's a
reaction.
weird God. This is like a cosmic equilibrium. You brought
Hmm.
down the wrath of the Almighty, so you were punished physically, and then sort of as a product of that, emotionally and even spiritually for your rebellion. That's
That
kind of
that was the
insidious,
pitch.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It-
Have you noticed though that in the faith, like if I've done a video on this, if I got sick and I went to the hospital, there's no outcome where Jesus, God, Yahweh, whoever, is not the hero of the story.
of
Seth made a
course.
full recovery. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you so much for allowing this hospital stay to recover him or result in his whole body. If I partially recover, well, in my weakness, he is strong. God is going to use my infirmity to demonstrate his greater power. There was a video who had done it, Dark Matter 2525, based on something I had done in a speech about a guy who was shot. Well, there's a gang shooting, and the car goes by, and there's gunfire. The bullets miss him. God prevented. A
Hmm.
bullet strike saved his life. If he's winged, it should have been worse. He should have been killed. God allowed him to escape with minor injuries. If he's paralyzed, hey, he should have been dead, but at least he's still with us. In our weakness, he is strong. If he's killed, God called him home. We can't understand the mind of God. But this, in our light and momentary affliction, there is an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. It's this silly putty scenario where no matter what the hell happens, God gets a snow cone at the end of it. And it's bizarre. There's no point where they're like, wait a minute, I prayed. We didn't get the outcome we prayed for. What the hell's going on? Nobody seems to do that. I don't know. I'm rambling, Paul. I'm sorry about
Reminds me of two things. One is that, well, yeah, I'll do the medical one first. So one of the things, by spending a couple of years basically in hospitals for a couple of years recovering, was I got a chance to talk to a lot of medical professionals who I took very much care in my life to thank the medical professionals, because even the Christians often fail to do that, as you imagine. That, God did this or God did this. It's even if through their hands, that's good. But I would often talk to them about miracles and how often do you see miracles in the room, and all those kind of, and just I was curious because I was very recently fresh, kind of figuring out where I was going to land on all this atheist stuff. Um, and in confidence, when you're there daily and they see you often enough, they'll admit, well, we're told in staff training that if the patient wants to say it's a miracle, we are to play along with that in general, right? Because that is going to be part of their recovery. Their recovery is going to be better if whatever need to affirm with them is affirmed. And so, and I got that story over and over again from these medical professionals, to the extent now when I hear the miracle stories, well, even the doctor said it was a miracle, or even the nurse said it's a miracle. It's like, well, yes, that's what they're trained to do as part of their natural science. Best way to make you feel good is to affirm your belief, kind of a thing. It was
it.
just
I
That's just
think
sort of a weird thing. Go ahead.
if prayer worked, there would be no hospitals. And when
Right.
I say this to believers, they look at me like, you've oversimplified. Yours is a Crayola version of the faith. You've totally reduced things down because God uses physicians. We are his hands, we are his feet. I wrote a book called Christianity Made Me Talk Like an Idiot, where we talked about, you know, Lord, we ask that you help the chemo to cure the cancer. Makes no
Mm-hmm.
sense, right? It makes no sense. Lord, we ask you guide the hands of the surgeon. Makes no sense because we're talking about a physician who has the same level of ability, experience, and training one way or the other. And I think a great acid test is if you had a loved one who was going in for a critical, potentially life-saving surgery and they had an A B choice. Would you like the atheist physician who is at the top of their field and the most highly recommended with the best reputation? Or would you choose the believer, someone who lines up with your faith, who is not nearly as well recommended? I'd like to see the Christian make an A B choice because I'm convinced they'd pick the atheist who had more training, expertise, and a better reputation. And I think that's very telling. I don't think that's too much of an assumption, Paul. Don't you think most believers would be like, give me the person who knows what they're doing, right?
Yes, but that wouldn't stop them, I don't think, from praying for that atheist. The very same words that they'd guide their hand and that they pray for the chemo to work. In a way, these are, at least for me, and people have accused me of not really being a Christian, so maybe I don't know of what I speak. But for me, a lot of times, that's a placebo effect and a calming effect that I sometimes even still miss. Sometimes I'm thinking, oh, I wish I had somebody to pray about this for, just because I'm anxious in these particular moments, and appealing to an authority felt like something I could do slightly more than just sitting here and waiting. Those, so I feel like some of those prayers would still be shot up, even if they pick the atheist. They can have their cake and eat it too, I think, on that dichotomy.
There, a lot of psychology, I think, behind prayers. If someone comes into your hospital room, you've got attention. You've got someone demonstrating love and care. I mean, they're genuinely grieving or concerned for you. Well, that's important, and that's a very amazing human thing. There's touch. People gather around and you hold hands and pray together. So that's a sensory experience that produces a physiological effect. There's the placebo effect, which is a real effect. I talked to psychiatrist Dr. Andy Thompson about this and the fact that, the placebo effect has been studied as having an effect. It doesn't mean the placebo does anything other than perhaps trick you into having a response, but it doesn't mean that the medicine itself has merit. But all of those things really are human things to get together and to say, I care about you. What can I do to hold a hand to, I don't know. I'm searching for the words today. Forgive me. I'm a little bit zoned out. I need more coffee, but I really think that it cheats a lot of people to direct them to a third party, an invisible third
Hmm.
party that may have some divine plan. There was a study about heart patients who were prayed for and not prayed for. Does prayer actually work? Let's try to put together a double blind study. And the people who were prayed for and knew about it actually fared a little bit worse than everybody else. So we've never seen anything demonstrable as far as the power of prayer. Personally, I'm glad those who were praying for your doom, Paul, were not successful
I
because the world
appreciate.
is a better place with you
I
in it.
actually put that very study you just referenced on when I made my Facebook announcement, as that's how things become official in the last 20 years, I saw, about my illness. I did literally I cited that exact study, and I said, well, if you are going to pray for me, you can help by not telling me that you're praying for me. That was the best thing you could do.
Yeah, it's almost like they say that those who live their whole lives and then die, but they've never heard the gospel, are supposed to go
Hmm.
to heaven. I'm not sure exactly if that's based in a verse in the Bible, but it was a teaching in the Baptist church where everybody who's heard has had the opportunity to accept or reject Jesus. So there will be a heaven or hell consequence for you. But if those who have never heard the gospel, they're a tribe on the most remote island on planet Earth, and no missionaries ever shown up, and they were never told if they die, then they get a free ticket to heaven. And of course, the next question is, why would you ever tell them? Right? Just
That's
leave
right.
them alone.
That's,
And the whole island gets to go to heaven. So, if you're game to hit some phone calls, I see a
oh, we have some
potpourri.
calls. Let's do it.
of comments and questions. I am going to start with a web call. Jackie, pronouns are he, him, out of, is it Mississippi, Jackie?
Yes, it's Mississippi.
Welcome. Do you have a comment or question for Paul or myself, or both?
Well, both. It's more of a discussion I'd like to have about the nature of faith, and maybe we can get into some epistemology, if that's okay.
Okay, you cut out just a little bit. The nature of epistemology, the study of knowledge, how we know what we know. Is that right?
Yeah, epistemology and faith.
All right, go ahead.
So, just also as a disclaimer, I've been told by a previous listener show named John Gleason, if you guys are familiar with him, that I should disclose that I'm 16 before I talk to the host, just so they know that they're approaching with somebody who's on a lower age level than them. I just wanted to know, are either of you familiar with the philosopher Karl Jaspers?
I'm not sure I heard correctly. The what called Jaspers?
The philosopher Karl Jaspers.
Thank you. The philosopher Karl Jaspers does not ring a bell with me. Paul? No?
Nor I, no.
Okay.
Okay. The reason I asked was because on a previous call I had with Forrest Valkai, he said that Paul was more educated about philosophy than some of the other hosts on here. Basically,
okay.
Was that?
No, sorry. I mean, that might be true of some hosts, but I wouldn't consider that my specialty. But I love philosophical discussions, so let's go.
Yeah, so basically Karl Jaspers was a German philosopher who was one of the two people who taught, do you know who Hannah Arendt was?
No.
Again?
Well, never mind. So Hannah Arendt was a Jewish woman who survived the Holocaust and later became a political philosopher. But basically, Karl Jaspers' philosophy around the same time as Martin Heidegger. He was saying that basically there's three modes of being. There's objective being, subjective being, and being in itself. And being in itself can be categorized as inherently God, because God we generally use to refer to as a transcendent being who can't be objectified. So like an object is like a chair, a subject is a being with emotions, right, and that can empirically observe things, and a being in itself can't be categorized objectively because, it can't be sensed by empirical, sense data, or research, and therefore, in order to have faith into being itself, in order to have faith into transcendence, because by definition, if it can't be objectified, it can't be objectively tested, it requires taking a leap of faith. Does that make sense?
Okay, I want to slow you down just a little bit, if I may. Go ahead, Paul.
I just wanted to maybe walk through again, probably the same question is like, so are you asking if it makes sense that basically through empirical study we can't determine a non-physical being? Is that in essence what you're asking, or did we miss?
But it's not just non-physical; it's non-objective. That say it can't be objectified.
Well, that's, I guess, what's the distinction between anything? You're using a weird definition of object then. If something exists, even if it's not physical, but it's not an object, so you are defining object as being made of matter?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
but
you could use that definition. Yeah, you could use that definition.
But if God is not made of matter, that doesn't mean that he's not a subject, right? Like that it's still, God is still at least a concept that we are talking about, and if in fact to whatever extent he is a being,
it's just God can't be neatly.
Hang on, Jackie. Let him finish. Go ahead, Paul. If God is not material, but he is a being, help me understand where you were going, Paul. And I'll come back.
If God's not material, if in fact he's a being, I guess he is still in all ways in terms of talking about objective, be it morality or objective actions. And also I feel like you're probably getting into contingency or non-contingency, in all those ways that matter. A being that is not made of physical matter is still philosophically an entity that can be spoken of, right? Like, so in what way
correct.
are you using object that is a distinction?
Well, by object, I just mean he can't be detected by sense data or by like empirical research. That's just what I mean. But you're correct. So Carl Justice, I actually have a theological disagreement because he did not believe revelation had a monopoly on the truth of God's nature, because he believed only dialogue could understand God's nature. Because I disagree with him. I do believe, as a statement of faith, that not only does a transcendent being exist that can't be categorized through empirical data, he's also all-powerful. And I do believe that that all-powerful being, if something's all-powerful, you can't quite grasp it with your mere human mind, but he can reveal himself. And I do believe that he did reveal himself, and I do believe revelation and God's revelation in the Bible is valid.
Okay. But
I'm going to
jump in,
go ahead,
please,
Paul.
Seth.
No. Go ahead, brother. I'm going to let you finish your thought, and then I'm.
All I was going to say was, at this point, you're now asserting that even though this being cannot be detected through empirical means, that because this being is interacting with our world and creating ripples that we can study. Is that a fair assessment of what you're saying?
Well, when he chooses to do revelation, yes.
Right. So then we can, at least in theory, study and know about him from the ripples of the causes that he's causing in the material realm. And so that's
correct. So you can, for example, look at biblical prophecy and say, I don't believe biblical prophecy is accurate, and I would, and we could argue about that. It's just that nowadays, I don't believe God will do like direct prophecy until the Messiah comes. But yeah.
All right. So can you bring this around now to whatever your question or statement was going to be about faith and epistemology?
Well,
because it feels like now
this is an epistemological difference I think Jasper's had with, you could say, more of the empiricist, right? There's a debate in philosophy between rationalism and empiricism, where rationalism is more about making a logical argument, empiricism is more about your sensory data. And I guess you could say this is a critique that if there's a being which can't be categorized through empirical sense data, then no matter how much scientific exploration you're going to do, you're never going to get it, because it's beyond the reach of epistemology. It's beyond the reach of empirical limits.
I think if you wanted someone to pitch that, you've called the wrong show. Seth, that's not your opinion, right? You don't believe that God is a scientifically testable entity, even if he exists?
Well, I believe that if the supernatural interacts with the natural, that is something that can be measured physically in the natural world. It's almost like the soul-mind conversation. If there is a third party, some sort of a metaphysical soul, what Dr. Dan Dennett called the supercalifragilisticexpialidocious factor, and it was actually driving my personality, my thoughts and behaviors. Well, that's a scientific exercise, because we would see the supernatural at some point interacting with the material and the physical. So I reject this idea that because it cannot be detected, it is therefore real. I'm not nearly as interested in what you believe, Jackie, as what you can demonstrate. So I believe. Well, you can walk in through any door into any church, any cult, any political party, any culture, any household, and say, I believe. But that and $5 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. I want to know, what can you demonstrate to prove not just a God, but your specific God, which appears to be the Christian God? If I'm sitting at a table and you want to prove God, how would you do that?
Well, the existence of God, I think this just goes back to the idea that there's certain things which can't be proven, but I think that there's certain assumptions scientific research makes that necessarily requires taking a leap of faith, right? Like, for example,
No, hang on. Hold on. I'm going to stop you, Jack. Forgive me. I'd like to go point by point, and that's why I'm going to occasionally interject. All right.
That's okay.
If you want to invoke faith, welcome to Islam, right? Welcome to various shades of Hinduism or Eastern mythologies, or, any number of the thousands of religious expressions that have taken hold across the planet through human history. Everybody invokes faith. You believe because you know because you believe. You can understand how that's not very impressive to a third party like me or to Paul, right?
I understand, but I think that even atheist people make leaps of faith to an extent. And the reason I believe that is because, for example, the scientific method, like the idea that there's an ordered structure to the universe itself, is an act of faith.
I'm sorry. What do you mean by ordered structure?
That there are set laws of logic that govern how the universe operates.
So there therefore must be a logic bearer, aka your deity, or we are
Well, no, it's
operating
just that
beyond
that
the
is.
laws
I'm
of
just
logic.
saying that's not what I'm arguing. What I'm arguing is just that's a statement of faith. It's a justified form of faith, in my opinion, but it is faith.
So, Jackie, I
Go
think
ahead,
what
Paul.
you're doing. Let me know if I'm correct here. I think what you're saying is that anything that we would say is axiomatic, you are saying has a faith element. Is that correct?
Yeah, to an extent, but again, there are different levels of justifiability. So some claims of faith are more justified than others, in my opinion.
Okay, but you understand that we call those axioms, not faith, right? So we are saying, as when we say something axiomatically, we are saying, for the sake of discussion, as long as this holds until we come up with a defeater or something to contradict it, we're just going to agree that we are not going to worry about whether the universe really exists, because that's not a helpful discussion every time we want to talk about anything. So we have certain axioms that we hold in science and in other areas, and that that the universe exists is an axiom. I will grant you, or that reality exists is an axiom. But I guess I don't tend to use it in any way that resembles faith, in that it's only tentatively held until such time as we see an opposing observation. Would you, or am I using axiom in a way that you are not using?
I think that's a fair definition of axiom. I would say it also goes beyond the notion of existing, because, there's cogito ergo sum, right, or Rene Descartes' famous, I think therefore I am. So existence is contingent on your ability to think. What I would say the difference is also, like laws of logic. There are other laws of logic, laws of cause and effect, and many others.
But again, do you think that I accept the laws of identity and excluded middle and those kind of things on faith? Or am I just merely using those conversationally, axiomatically?
Well, I think they're both axioms, and they involve some faith. I'm not saying that they're unjustified. I'm just saying it's a justified form of faith, which has a lot of utility.
By what definition of faith is saying I'm going to accept that something is true until I see something counter, and I will immediately change my mind the second I see something counter? In what way is that faith? By what definition of faith are you using? Let's talk about your definition of faith, because I sure don't see how that's a faith proposition as opposed to a pragmatic proposition.
Well, I don't think it's mutually exclusive. So I'm just using the word faith to mean acceptance of a proposition as true or false, that can't be absolutely proven true or false.
Okay. So, of course, for most people, other than outside of the realm of mathematical proofs, that's really the only realm in which the word proof holds, per se, even though that is also built on top of axioms, which weirdly you might think are faith-based. I don't know if you think that mathematical axioms are faith or not.
I just think they're very justified. I do agree with you. Some are more justified than others. I just believe they're very, very, very justified.
So I'm going to take a sip of coffee just right here.
Okay.
Now, I cannot prove that I just had a sip of coffee, but I can't, like, that can't be proven. But everyone's pretty well accepted, and especially I am very well accepted because I could taste it and I know what coffee was and I made it myself. So did I just have faith that I
No, you
drank
didn't
some
just
coffee?
have faith. No, you didn't just
So,
have faith.
but there was some element. You think that there's some element of what you would call meaningful faith in
maybe
my.
maybe it's like 99.9% observed empirical reality and like 0.1% faith or something like that, like a crazy proportion.
Okay.
But
So is this a distinction with a difference, Jackie? When you're,
well, the distinction with
or
the
are you
difference
just wanting
is,
to be smirched? Like Seth and I had a conversation before this started about, wanting to drag someone down into, you're just as religious as I am because you have
if
faith.
you just that's not my intention, because I would say if you can provide a logical argument why religious faith is not nearly as justified as faith in axioms of the scientific method, then you would still be able to make a case that religious faith is on a much lower level of justifiability. We just have to actually have that discussion, and I'm open to that discussion.
Seth, do you universally say that all faith is bad?
All faith is bad?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I hold that it's called faith because it's not knowledge, so I don't really give credence to faith as a form of knowledge, and I sense that Jackie is doing so. Is that a dodgy answer to the question? Because that's my answer to your question.
Hang
on, Jackie. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think Jackie was answering my question, so I may have misread that. But I'm not sure that you are, if you're calling to say a fight that that everyone accepts propositions for which there is not 100% proof. I think I would just nod my head and say, yes, we all accept propositions. But I think that Seth and I'll speak for myself. I like to apportion my confidence, which is another synonym for faith for some. I like to apportion my confidence to the level of the evidence. And so...
And I do too. I also try to apportion. If I have certain things which are, again, I said there's level of justifiability. You can also use the word confidence. So something like, I don't know, are there aliens who are currently occupying the White House who are sending out secret messages and they're trying to brainwash the public? Is that, justified? No, that's like a very, very, very unjustified example of belief. But I would just say, probably between the three of us, I hold religious claims, particularly argument from contingency and the Kalam cosmological argument, as more justified than you might accept as justified.
Okay, well, you're talking about belief.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're on a quest for knowledge. What can be demonstrated? So if we are to get into the Christian faith, we would have to ask you to demonstrate that the origin of humankind comes from a couple of cosmically conjured garden nudists who talk to, reptiles, and that a donkey spoke Hebrew, and that the earth was flooded, and that the geologic column proves that, and people lived to be 900 years old, and there were giants and magic spells and all these other things. So what you're telling me is that you operate from a position that your faith is proof. And for Paul and me, that's simply not a mechanism that we can accept. I also don't see the scientific method as a position of faith or an exercise in faith. I see it as a process for trying to determine what works and what doesn't. I forget who was it, a philosopher who was talking about how it's okay for an open mind to close on something, provided it's not totally welded shut. The overwhelming avalanche that we've seen, the overwhelming amount of evidence that we have for evolution by natural selection has allowed us to go ahead and close that one down and say that's pretty much settled, but it's not welded shut, because we, as creatures of honesty, using the scientific method, if we were ever presented with a reality, a point of fact, something that we hadn't expected that could be tested, that proved that we were all in a big snow globe. We were a brain in a vat, and we were in the Matrix or some other situation was to be involved, we would have to then reopen our mind and adjust and improve our position, which is what science truly is. So I don't think that's a faith position. I think that is testing and retesting the world that we live in, doing our best to determine what is factual, and always being prepared to update our position. But I don't think living a life rooted in faith is the flex that many people believe that it is. That's fair, isn't it, Jackie?
Yeah, just as clarification, I'm going to be defending the more Orthodox Jewish theological perspective. So I'll defend the Old Testament if you want, but I do not believe Jesus is the Messiah. But
well, what you
I understand-
believe does not concern me, Jackie. I'm interested in
but
what
I am
can
just
be
saying that
proven.
just as clarification.
Okay,
So
well, I've had you. I agree with one of our commenters that when we get into these types of, they're not even really esoteric conversations, we tend to be drifting into a word salad of I believe, and it's almost a Jordan Peterson-esque philosophy exercise, which isn't philosophy. And I just don't know how productive this is going to be. So you don't believe in a Jesus. You've decided the Old Testament is where you're going to hang your hat. And if you want to get into proving the Old Testament, man, that's a whole other phone call. I don't know, Paul, did you want to pursue anything before I move on from Jackie?
I guess all I was going to ask from Jackie was, what, in your opinion, epistemologically, what are Seth and I doing wrong? If you can express that in like a sentence or two.
So-
What are Seth and I doing wrong
I suppose
in the way we believe? Go ahead.
the reason metaphysically I accept an eternal God as representative of truth is because I believe that Aristotle's unmoved mover or the Kalam cosmological argument. Basically, I believe that as long as the material world exists and is bound by cause and effect, there had to be an uncaused cause. Which
Okay, but that's not the answer to my question, though. Like I said, epistemologically. So you agree that you just basically said that these arguments you find convincing, that Seth I don't find convincing, but you didn't identify what in our epistemology, which seemed to be what you called about. So I wanted to give you one last chance to say, epistemologically, on a general basis, what are we doing wrong? Other than not finding the same arguments.
I don't think you're doing anything wrong. I just think we have a different definition of faith. Maybe I'm just using the word faith to define acceptance of propositions that aren't absolute as faith, but perhaps you have a different definition of faith. Either way, I think both you and I would agree that the core of epistemology is getting to the truth using the preponderance of evidence. I just believe that certain things in reality are beyond empirical observation, and therefore you should use logical arguments like the Kalam cosmological argument, but that's not the same as the scientific method.
Okay, so next time you call in, if you decide to call in again, maybe start there instead of a general, because now what you're trying to, you seem to agree that we're doing the same epistemological moves and maneuvers, so maybe you should just start with the arguments that you find compelling and tell us why within that framework we should find them compelling. I think that would be probably where next time you call in, since it sounds like you've called into some other shows, that I would suggest you start there.
Okay, and I have gone over some of the other arguments about the Kalam and other things on some of the other shows, but if you want me to call again in the future.
Sounds good. In general, I find the Kalam to be laughably terrible, but that's a whole other can of worms. We have other callers waiting, so I don't want to start onto that.
Thank you, Jackie. I appreciate your call very much, sir.
Okay, and I appreciate you guys as human beings as well.
Thank you.
We'll see you later. Let's talk Kalam quickly. I know this is old hat for many who are in the audience, but there may be some who have no idea what we're talking about whenever Jackie is invoking the metaphysical. Red flag right off the bat. Then he spins into belief, right? I believe, I believe, I believe. And the whole time we're asking, how can you demonstrate? What's the foundation for that belief? And William Lane Craig repopularized the Kalam cosmological argument. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause, which isn't even a God proposition. Something or someone or who knows, did the universe has it. It's and then they take this monumental canyon-sized leap to their specific deity with a proper name. Jackie's going, everything that began to exist has a cause. It must have been Yahweh. And even William Lane Craig, the apologist, has never been able to connect that dot. So I'll let you I know you've talked a lot about Kalam. Further thoughts, Paulogia?
I guess nothing probably new, nothing people who've heard this argument before would find new. I guess for me, the big objection, even if I, on a day when I do want to get into those weeds, I don't think that they've demonstrated that the universe has a cause, and if so, then we're using a whole different set of what the word universe means. I know some people push back on the first, and of course the giant gaping truck-sized hole of the conclusion isn't therefore God, and so why are we even having this conversation?
The appeals to faith just make me crazy. I believe, so I know, is something that you could apply to any claim, anywhere.
Yeah.
And you and I both came out of a faith culture, and it used to sound true. It used to sound profound. It used to be something that we thought, yes, this has weight in the arena of ideas. And when you come out, you think, well, it's called faith because it's not knowledge. And if we don't know, we withhold judgment. And I think it's perfectly fine to look at the Bible and whether it's the Old or the New Testament, we can dissect that particular religious model and we can outright say it's bullshit. It's been debunked scientifically, historically, morally. Jackie invoked fulfilled prophecy. You got to be shitting me. I narrated a book from Dr. Joshua Bowen, who did an exploration into the Old Testament, including failed prophecies. And even if something looked fulfilled as referenced in New Testament verses, it would be like you and I writing an article for a newspaper in 2024 when we had access to a newspaper that was written in 1904 and saying, I'm going to use this as a cheat sheet and then say that I predicted and it came true. It's totally a cheat. The prophecy arguments I find monumentally frustrating. And most of the people who get into Daniel and that kind of thing, I don't think they know what they're talking about. So, would you like me to grab another call, Paul? Because
please do. Let's. It's fun to hang out with you, but let's get more people involved.
I'm going to say, is it Kyna? Is it Kina or Kina? She, her, out of Washington?
Yeah, it's pronounced Kina. Hello.
Kina.
Hello.
My apologies for screwing that up. I'm so glad you're here. Comment or question for the show? What do you think?
Oh, I want, sorry, first time calling into a call-in show. I'm flustered.
You're doing fine. You're doing great.
I recently switched from a sort of utilitarian ethics to an agency-based moral framework, and like the logic seems right to me, but it would be very strange to me if I who am not a professional philosopher came up with something that I haven't yet seen talked about in like Philosophy Tube or something. So I feel like I'm doing something wrong. And since Paul is very good at picking apart logic, I was hoping to have his opinion.
Well, do me a favor, right? And use small words so I can understand. What do you mean by agency-based moral framework? Can you flesh that out for me?
Right. Sorry, I'll try to slow down. So one of the main problems I kept running into when I was, whether it's like deontology or whether I want to give myself an ironclad set of rules, like I need this is what you're supposed to do in this situation, or whether I want to go to utilitarianism, which is like okay, we're supposed to maximize pleasure and minimize harm, right? There's always like these weird edge cases where like everything starts to fall apart.
right? Whether you have like, don't tell a lie. Well, now there's, I mean, I won't say it because you'll get demonetized, but the usual thing. Or you have, and then utility monsters, stuff like that. So what I went with instead is one where like basically the underpinning of the whole system is like the reason that we say that we should maximize pleasure and minimize harm is because as agents, that's what we're trying to do, because that's just what animals do, right? So instead of I basically just want to cut off the middleman and, okay, I am an agent and other people are agents. So I should try to accomplish what I want without getting in the way of what other people want in as much as is possible. Which seems like
I'm not sure.
it's much more
I'm not sure I totally agree with your premise, because not getting in the way of what other people want assumes other people want pro-social things, moral things, right? What if other people want to spread pseudoscience? What if other people want to torture animals? What if other people want to turn the United States into Gilead? Staying out of their way then would not be a moral act. Is that fair?
Yeah, but the way I figure it, like I live in a society, so keeping a healthy society is part of not causing problems for anyone, and it's also part of keeping me safe, right? Because like there, I'm going to suffer too if we live in a bad society.
Hang on, kind of forgive me, Paul. We could say Hitler's Germany was a society. Keeping that society together would not have been the moral thing. And as much as I'm not sure I hold to Godwin's law. I don't think the invocation of Hitler is a cheat in that way, that you've automatically lost. I think there's utility in talking about societies that maybe even they are strong in a toxic way, but they're fortified. The people inside are connected as a society, even in a negative way, in a harmful way. So this idea that that's the measuring stick for whether or not something is good for us, good for the species, is a little bit problematic for me. I think if you go back to minimizing harm, that to me seems like a better model than, I almost hear a live and let live kind of vibe. Am I reading that wrong, kind of?
Well, I mean, sort of. Like like something like Hitler's Germany, I think that is the euphemism we're going to use to, like it might be a healthy society in the sense that it is, as you said, strong in its ability to do things, but like most people were not really able to express their own personal agency in that society. Like obviously, especially if you were Jewish, right? So I actually wouldn't think that like I wouldn't call that a healthy society from my viewpoint, because if the goal is to maximize agency, then
let me open it up.
Society is actively harm. Okay, sorry.
For the sake of momentum, allow me to make a course correction here, and a better example might be here in the United States. If the Christian nationalists, and everybody's speaking freely, right? No one's worried about a machine gun. People coming into their homes and stealing their children. They're not worried about firing squads and all of that in this country. But we are at sort of a boiling point. If the Christian nationalists want to take over and turn us into a theocracy, to weaponize the halls of government, to establish a state church, to strip the rights away from women and LGBT people, etc. Well, those people are able to speak freely, as you and I are speaking freely against it. But in a society, both of those are not equivalent moral positions, are they?
No, because I feel like it's the purpose of why we're speaking, right? Like if I'm speaking to try to preserve agency and they're speaking to try to stamp down on agency, then like even if the medium is the same, right? Like the motivations and the goals are not. so they don't have the same moral value.
So to minimize harm, though, we would like to see the agents of harm defeated. We would like to see specific ideas that have been spoken about freely defeated. We would like to see that sort of segment of poor values, of antisocial values. We'd like to see that defeated. That would not be an enemy of agency. All right. That would not be an enemy of morality. I would think that would be a victory for a more moral way of living. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, though I think that falls into like the 90% of cases where like utilitarianism and deontology and what I'm putting forward would all agree.
So where do
I've
you
spoken
this
enough.
agent
Paulogia, go ahead,
this
brother.
well
Go
this
ahead.
agency idea? I'm curious where you think it is superior. What is it about minimizing harm and maximizing flourishing that is insufficient, that is better handled by your agency model? What corner cases are you imagining where that's the case?
So partly it's because, like, I mean, I feel like, well, case in point, like, let's take trans people, right? Like, you know, under a harm or, you know, pleasure and harm model, we have to identify what is the harm that is caused by, you know, not being able to transition, and what is the pleasure that is enabled by giving HRT and things. But like, you know, under an agency model, you just sidestep that whole thing. Like, okay, well, they want this, and is it causing any problems? Probably not. So let's just let it happen. So I feel like
I'm not sure. Yeah, I think if I wanted to identify potentially a problem with that is you seem to want to create a heuristic. You want to create a shortcut. You don't want to work through the benefits and the harms. And I feel like that is actually, even though a lot of times just through our hundreds of thousands of years of our species existing, we do have some heuristics on murder bad, stealing bad. Like we have some shortcuts there. But unfortunately, when things get tough, that is the time when you really do need to work through those specific things you just spoke about. And so that you can justify where a person wants to land on those moral issues, as opposed to, and as Seth was saying, if the answer is, I'm going to let everyone do whatever they want as long as they're not hurting somebody, you still then need to articulate, are they hurting someone or not? Like, I don't think you've actually removed any burden or removed any work, because you're just by default going to allow people to just go on their way. Am I wrong about that? Am I short shrifting your notion?
I mean, I do feel like I'm not communicating something, but like I feel like the idea as I've communicated, yes, I think you're correct.
Okay.
Like, honestly, one of the
all I was going to say is, you know, if you don't like the golden rule, if you don't like the whole empathy based notion and the superior versions of golden rule, but essentially the empathy based morality that we're speaking of here, another way, if you just want to do the shortcut, is what if everyone behaved in a certain way? So that's a shortcut I like to give to my kids and to other people when they want to come up with if they're wrestling with something that's kind of tricky, right? What's the real harm? Let's just take something innocuous, not innocuous, but like I'm going to pirate a movie, right? There's lots of, is that right or wrong? We could do whole shows on discussion about that. But one way to think about some of those things is, what if everyone in society took the action or inaction that I was about to do, right? So if I'm just going to live and let live, what if everyone lived and let lived in the same way? Would I want to live in that society or not? And I'm not saying I have an answer for you. I'm just saying that's a useful question a lot of times when it comes to some of these more, if you can't really parse down to the specific harms and the specific benefits, extrapolating an action across a whole society is an often a way of illuminating whether an action is right or wrong. And I don't even like the binary of right or wrong, because I feel like we always have imperfect information and everything's on a spectrum. But was that helpful at all?
I mean, I guess so. I mean, I'm not really trying to eliminate empathy from the equation. If anything, this was me trying to enable more of it.
Okay.
I will admit, one of the reasons I had for considering this probably doesn't interest any watchers of the show, which is why I kind of omitted it. So I feel like I didn't think this through. Okay.
Well, Keena,
we're
this
just
is
here to talk.
probably, as I sort of take the temperature of the conversation and browse the chat with one eye, it does seem like this may be a conversation more suited to a niche type of forum, which, really, really can get into the deep waters of the morality argument. But it provides at least a starting point for conversations about ethical behavior, pro-social behaviors, and how we can factor agency into those. And I appreciate the call very much, Keena. But I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next, if I may. Would that be all right?
Yeah. Thanks for the reality check and your time.
Oh, you're very
Thank
kind.
you.
Thanks for calling the show. Did I give this example on the show before? You and I both came out of a sort of everything was reductive. Lying is bad. Lying immoral. Do not lie. And I get that, right? Don't be dishonest I think it is an ethical, to do so would be a way to try and live ethically. But we look at life situationally. And was it Shannon? Maybe you and I were talking with Shannon Q on my show. And we came up with the scenario where a woman who's been beaten by her husband, and she's horribly battered and terrified, shows up at my door. And I open my door, and Natalie and I say, "Get in here." And we lock the door, right, for her safety. And her abusive husband shows up, and he starts banging on the door, and he says, "Is my wife in there?" Well, if you only look at the surface, telling the truth would be the right thing to do, because we should never bear false witness. We should never be dishonest. We should never lie. But if I'm going to act to minimize harm, the ethical move is to say she's not here, or to do whatever I can to remove the immediate threat from that scenario. And so many of these conversations about ethical behaviors, they simply don't make room for that. They think, well, you're trying to be equivalent, you're trying to stretch it out to make excuses for being dishonest in your life, blah, blah, blah. But I just don't think this stuff fits in a cookie cutter. You've had those conversations about what is and is not moral, right?
All the time. Although way too often I get stuck into what I feared that call was going to be was, how do we ground it? What's the ontology? What's the, how do we remove the ethical consideration out of it and put it into a God's hands, right? Or an objective sense, they want to say, or an absolute sense of morality. So I'm even a little bit refreshed when people are at least considering, oh, well, let's take harm and well-being, and how do we best suss those out? I know it's a very imperfect science, and as you just illustrated there, I think that is one of the places where ethics-based morality fails over situational-based ethics. But if this had been a solved situation, we'd be in a much better society. As I said, I think the best that we can do is have. I feel like the best we can do is have the best intent with the best information available to us, and sometimes that best action actually means getting more information, because we can't just live in the excuse that we didn't know something. There's lots of examples in that. Go ahead.
The perfect is the enemy of the good.
Right.
Right. We are not going to be able to get this totally right. This is messy. And I walked over you again. I've already been chided in the comments section. Apparently somebody said I was monopolizing. If I've done so, my deepest apologies, Paul. I certainly want to make sure that I've given plenty of bandwidth. So let's take a look at, I'll get the first theist who's been waiting the longest. I see Sam, pronouns they, them. calling from, is it Iowa, Sam?
Yes.
Welcome. Comment or question for Paulogia or myself?
I have a quick comment and then discussion topic. First of all, to Paul, I've followed your channel for a while. It's been really helpful in me kind of figuring things out, figuring out my own process. No offense to Seth, I'm just not as familiar with you.
No,
Well, Seth
take a number.
inspired my
Most people
channel,
are
so
not.
if you like my channel, it wouldn't exist without Seth. So
Paul is the adult in the room. I am a boy in his world. I tremble in the garden of his turbulence. Go ahead, you and Paul. Hit it.
I mean, you can feel free to chime in. The general topic I have, though, is kind of how to approach discussing with Christians that bring up a lot of stuff about personal anecdotes. Like, I grew up around a lot of people that would say things like, they prayed and they felt like a burden was lifted off their shoulder, or they felt comforted, they felt the presence of God, things like that. And it's especially hard for me to discuss it because I can't really relate. I tried praying a lot growing up, and it only ever felt like I was just talking to myself. So it's hard for me to find ground to discuss that.
I trust and I hope that they are not trying to make you feel lesser than for not having felt those experiences or having them. I'm going to trust that the conversation is, and correct me if I'm wrong, because that's a whole different conversation. It sounds like, though, that perhaps you're wondering, how do I represent why that's not compelling to me, Sam? Is that more along the lines of your question?
Yeah, because, I mean, I have run into the people that will do things like, well, you obviously didn't believe enough or things like that. But
right.
When it's people that are more willing to kind of come to my level to discuss it, that is kind of what I give, because I can't just say, like, well, I don't believe you had that experience, because how would I know? So I don't really know where to connect there with that.
You've done the first thing correct. And I feel like even though you might want to discount whether that person has had that experience, I found that goes poorly in conversations. In my conversations with Christians, saying just denying their experience is unhelpful and probably a mistake anyway. So I think you've done the right thing in affirming, if indeed that's what you're doing, affirming that person, you believe that person experienced that thing. You believe that person had that feeling of whatever coming off of their shoulders, or the emotion of a warmth, reassurance, that you accept them on that grounds. And then and I'm sure Seth would give you the same answer. It's why are you attributing it, or how can you justify your attribution? So I'm not denying the experience. What I'm denying is what you're attributing that experience to. Can you explain to me how you are attributing this sense of warmth, comfort to a god, or weight off of your shoulders, meaning a supernatural force stepped in and intervened on your behalf? It's that attribution word, and it's the attribution effect that I think is where you want to spend your time in that conversation. I tend to just grant for the sake of argument, a lot of that stuff. And even if it's someone like a Mike Lycona, who was talking about in his debate about the resurrection that garbage cans were floating around in the room, right? I don't even attack the garbage cans. Were they really floating around or not? Yeah, Mike, I accept that that's what you perceived and that's what you think was happening. Let's talk about what you're attributing it to instead. Is that attack you've attempted? And if so, what do they say?
I guess not quite in that. The way I usually try to approach it is I just kind of word it as, well, how can you demonstrate anything to me from that? Like, why should I believe because of your experience? I mean, I don't know anyone personally. I'm sure I could find a Muslim or someone that would say something similar. So it's like, how do I distinguish which experiences come from what?
That is super helpful. That actually is a nice note to have them think about, is the fact that experiences are non-transferable, and that so if God, like the Holy, and they would, if they're a Christian at least, they would tend to agree, like the Holy Spirit coming in power on Pentecost to the apostles isn't transferable to me, right? Or that the inner witness of the Holy Spirit doesn't transfer from a first person. So that's good to get on record. So at least they're not trying to say, I had this experience, therefore you should believe. I think that's a conversation success. I would push it though, and then push it further and say, well, how can you justify your attribution? If you choose to want to continue to have those kind of conversations, it sounds like you are welcoming these conversations, at least. If you're not, that's a whole
Right.
different boundary question.
Right. Like I tend to accept it because even if I didn't have those experiences, I mean, I grew up Christian most of my life. I only went to Christian schools. I never went to a public school. So there's a part of me that still kind of gets it. Like I get that the conversation often is coming from concern because they're concerned, about my soul, things like that. So I want to grant them that they are coming from a place of concern. I don't want to, unless they're obviously one of those people that just come in to be like, well, you should try this, or they just try to come in with why I'm wrong rather than actually discussing it.
Now, Seth has actually had this conversation, way more of these conversations than I have had. Seth, do you have advice beyond, or would you affirm what I said, or do you have other advice in these
I
conversations?
think Sam actually referenced a tactic that I would have used, which is, and this, I'm a huge fan of street epistemology, where you just use questions. I'm a big fan of de-escalation, calm voice. Let's all be adults in the room. Let's make people feel safe, unless they're just coming after us. But if they're expressing a position, and our goal is to try to change perception, to change minds, to expand the tent of ideas, then I think, well, if I was sitting at a table and a devout Muslim said that they had had a personal experience and it was similar to yours, how would I know the difference? And I think they can relate to that. And I think it's possible they would feel less attacked. If you say, well, how would I know that? There's a chance that someone with an identity belief like that might think, well, you don't know because you're broken. But if you say, if I am with two people who make a similar claim assigned to different deities and religious models and dogmas and holy books and cultures and truth claims, how would I know? I think that's that's something that might be more palatable. So, and you're the one who brought that up. If I may, I see, did the call-in say that you are a theist, or was that a typo and you're an atheist? Because you don't sound like a theist to me, Sam.
I had put it in as like deconstructing theist.
Where are you in your journey? Like, give me a broad picture of, are you out? Do you still call yourself a believer in some way? Are you spiritual? Something else?
I mean, I guess I'm kind of into the category of I'm not sure anymore. Like, there's definitely
Which
been
is
a
a
lot
totally
of
fair category. That's a totally
right.
fair category. Yeah. Go ahead, Sam. Forgive me. My fault.
It's all right. Because I still, even after I left the church I grew up in, I still kind of jumped around with Christian churches, and eventually it kind of came to a point of I realized that a lot of my belief really came down to the emotional aspect, and like, well, I want this to be true. And I kind of begun to poke at that idea of, okay, does me wanting it to be true mean anything?
Which I think speaks to the psychology of belief. You have now gone past the truth claims and you are beginning to examine the gears in the machine. That's an amazing place to be. Some people might want to rush you through that to a conclusion that they've got ready for you. Don't take that bait. Don't feel like you are a coward if you don't know an answer. I just think it's amazing that you've been honest with yourself enough to say, I'm not sure. I don't know. I have real doubts about this. I think this is probably horseshit, but I'm just going to continue to tap on the glass and kick the tires and ask the questions and when appropriate, roast the sacred cows. I mean, that's a gutsy thing to do that a lot of people don't. They just never get there. And I think that's remarkable, Sam. So that inspires me. I think wherever your journey takes you, I hope it takes you to good places, honest places. And ultimately, the goal is an authentic life rooted in the real. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's it's stuck out to me a lot when I've listened into the show a bit of people discussing, I'm concerned with what's true. And it feels like such an obvious thing, but it's not something that I ever really stopped to think about with that.
Yeah. Well, you're thinking, and that's something that we need more of in this crazy world. Be safe and be well. Thanks for the call, Sam.
All the best, Sam.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to make sure and do my due diligence here. We've got shows on the horizon. Don't forget, on the line, we've got After Dark, Matt Dillahunty and Aron Ra, my brothers, not in the Lord, but we're all sort of brothers. We actually, we've known each other for a long, long time. The first time I ever came out as an atheist, I hosted the Thinking Atheist channel for 2 years without showing my face and only giving my first name. And the reason was, as I was still extricating myself from the faith, I worked in a job that served churches. So I was thinking, what's going to happen? Am I going to lose my job? How will I pay the mortgage and the bills? All my friends going to abandon me? And I was sort of in this weird, very difficult place. But I also had a fire in my belly to be a part of these conversations. And so I'd started the channel and been anonymous. And it was just the Thinking Atheist icon that everybody saw, and they heard my voice, but I was kind of anonymous. And so I launched the site in 2009.
That's naive. You have the most distinct voice.
Well, it was just 2009. So back then I was pretty anonymous. And it was in 2011 that Tulsa, Oklahoma had a free thought event called Free OK. And I decided I'm going to let the cat out of the bag. I'm going to go speak publicly. The gorilla's out of its cage. People are just going to know. And Matt and Aron were there. And that's the first time we had ever met in person. And we just hit it off. And we've toured the United States and Australia and spoken in Canada. As a group of three, we called ourselves tongue-in-cheek the Unholy Trinity, and had a lot of fun doing that. Anyway, digression. Matt and Aron,
yes, I'm feeling
tonight.
I'm feeling very fourth wheel today because yes, the Holy Trinity and Paul. Yeah.
not at all. You're the archangel, Paulogia. Let's see. I'm going to pull this back up. Skeptalk going on tomorrow night. John Gleason and Adair. That's at 6:00. Tuesday night, the Chewed Gum broadcast is going to be fantastic. Arden, Hart, and Stacy. We've got the Hang Up. Matt Dillahunty is going to join Mandisa Thomas, or vice versa. That's coming up Wednesday at 6. Thursday, the Transatlantic Call-In Show, Arden Hart with Josie. Fantastic broadcast Thursday night. Just subscribe to The Line and remind me, what's the Patreon to support? Obviously, the Super Chats, even though we're not reading those today, they do help to support this channel and make these programs possible. So Super Chats, even though we don't read them today, they are still seen in the chat thread, and they make a massive difference. And Arden or whoever, someone have the Patreon? I want to make sure.
Patreon.com/calltheline.
Patreon.com/calltheline. Arden's voice is like the voice of God. Have you noticed? It just comes out and it's in your, like you literally have this sort of a picture of omniscience and omnipotence, and yet you see nothing with your physical eyes.
If God was from the north. That's right.
Yes. You ready for another one, Paul? Because I've got a few queued up here, and the phone number is on the screen, or the web link if you want to dial in via Skype or whatever. Let's do another theist. I see Anthony out of Virginia, pronouns he, him. Anthony, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
I sure
Yeah.
can. What do you
Hello?
have for the show today?
good.
Comment or question?
Yes, I saw the title of today's show is Christianity Worth Believing In? And one thing that I think needs to be established is, what is Christianity? And in my research, what I've found is that there is no expression of Christianity in modern times that represents what it was originally supposed to be. So when people, atheists, skeptics, reject Christianity, they are not actually rejecting the true essence of Christianity. They're rejecting an illusion. And I just wanted to kind of discuss that today. And maybe if people knew what true Christianity really was, they'd be more willing to accept some parts of it or all of it.
Anthony, would
cannot
you
wait.
define true Christianity for me? What is true Christianity?
True Christianity, it should be defined as following the faith Jesus Christ established as he established it. And that is not what any modern Christian institution does. The Protestants and the Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox, which are the main groups, there are others, obviously, not a single one of them follows the faith that Jesus Christ. I know a lot of people don't believe Jesus actually existed.
Okay, all right. Well, forgive me, Anthony, but I'm going to draw you back. What is the faith that Jesus set into place originally? What's the genesis of the faith that Christ put down that is Christianity? What is that?
Christianity, according to Jesus Christ, is actually contained in the Gospels, and it is a way of life. It is not necessarily a set of dogmas.
I'm hearing adjectives. Look, I'm hearing adjectives. But what is it? What are the edicts? What does it say? What does it command?
Well, Christianity is about. Let me kind of express, unravel a little bit. It's about how to attain eternal life, and the way we do that is by our behavior on this earth, how we act towards other people. And according to Jesus, the way we do that is by, one, loving God, and two, loving our neighbors. Now, I know atheists have a problem with the first one, but loving our neighbors, I think they can accept. And the way we do that is essentially through unselfishness and following what Jesus says the commandments of God are, which are pretty much the 10 Commandments minus the Sabbath.
Okay, Anthony, can someone be commanded to love someone else? Right? Thou shalt love the Lord your God with all of your heart. How do I make myself love God?
How do you? Well, it's something you would choose to do if that's how you feel. If you want to love God, you're supposed to
wait
love
a minute.
God.
Should love be earned? I mean, where does that sense of love come from? If someone says, I command you to love me, thou shalt love the Lord thy God.
Well,
how do
when
you
we say
command someone
command,
to love you?
well, see, actually, God, if God was really commanding us, then we would do it. But really, God is giving us the choice, and we can either love God, and that's the choice we could make, or we could not love God, and we will experience the consequences of that action.
Okay, but understand how that sounds, because this is the language of an abuser. Love me, or I'll burn you. Love me, or I'll condemn you. Love me, or I'll reject you, and harm may come to you. This is not a healthy model for love, right? I mean, love me or else doesn't sound like something that a truly benevolent deity, a father, would say to a child. That's fair, isn't it?
Actually, I think that it is a loving thing to do, because what you're saying is, what God is saying is, if you love me, then this will be the result. But I'm not going to make you love me. And if you don't want to love me, then, there will be separation, and that's your choice, and you're free to make that choice. I think that's giving you the option, and that's perfectly loving. It's not forceful. It's not abusive.
It's a
So
command. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind. It's a command.
Yeah, and well, but it's not a forced action. It's something that God, says that we should do. But if we're not forced to do it, and if we don't do it, then there are consequences, and that's true of
What
all, even human.
what does whether or not I am forced to do it have to do with the fact that it's a command? He's saying, do it or else. Love me or else. We agree there. That's what he's saying, correct?
Yes, that is what's being said.
Do you
And
think that's something that we would accept in everyday life? Would you look at someone else and say, I command you to love me or else? Or in fact, you may be
well,
harmed.
let's just take it to like the level of a father or an offspring relationship. I think we could. How would you feel? Said, okay, son, you can love me, and you get to stay in the house. But if you don't love me, I'm going to kick you out. Do you think that's an unfair thing to do?
yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess we disagree
Right.
there because
I
Why
think, look,
should I?
that's, go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
I'm
I'm used to hosting
a
a show
father.
solo, and I've been
No,
chided
that's
before.
fine. But I
Go ahead.
as a father, absolutely not. Would the taking care of any of my children is not contingent on any of their loving me. Is like that's way down the list. There have been many times when my children didn't love me for various reasons, and some of them deserve, some not deserved. Absolutely, and like looking after. If I love them, then absolutely respecting those choices without giving them consequences just for because I'm not feeling loved. That's ridiculous. And in no court, because you walk into court and say, you know what, I didn't feed my kids for a week because they didn't love me, which I showed them. Like that's is that not scary, Anthony? Does that not sound terrifying?
I guess I was actually more thinking along the lines of more of an adult offspring as opposed to someone who can't take care of themselves. Let me put it this way. Let's say there's a 50-year-old man with a 30-year-old son, and the father says, okay, son, if you can love me and we'll have a relationship, but if you choose not to love me, then there's not going to be a relationship there, and you're going to not experience. You're not going to inherit my wealth or whatever. Is that fair?
Okay, but
Anthony, is
that
that
might
the
be fair, but
consequence that you're speaking of,
yeah,
or do you believe in literal hellfire? What would the consequence be if, let's say, I don't obey the command to love God, which you say is true Christianity? If I don't do that, what's going to happen to me according to true Christianity?
Yeah, you will be separated from God at judgment.
And what will happen to me after I'm separated from God?
Well, my guess is that I can't, obviously I don't know with ontological certainty, but presumably there would be suffering as a result of that.
Okay,
so then your analogy did not hold. Then you understand your analogy didn't hold, right? Then it's not that my adult children have gone on to, we parted ways amicably because we don't love each other anymore. You acknowledge that, right? Your analogies no. We're back to Seth's mob analogy. It's like, if you don't love me, boy, you sure got a nice place here, but shame if something were to happen to it, kind of a thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, here's the thing. If there's a situation where you have a relationship with someone and you choose not to, reciprocate, then there are consequences to that. And even in human relationships, I don't understand why it's an issue when God demands it.
Okay, well, the Bible tells us to be as little children. We're supposed to come to Jesus as little children. The entire Christianity model infantilizes us, right? Because he is the Father and we are the children. We are helpless. We can't know the mind of God. We must rely totally on God. So I'm not sure that the adult child angle totally works. Secondly, I just don't understand why I don't love you would result in my suffering. Do you have any kids of your own, may I ask, Anthony?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, let's say you had a
But I can imagine.
son.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Your son, for whatever reason, and you don't have a relationship, right? Things are tumultuous. I don't know, and I don't care why. That's still your son. And your son, for some reason, does not love you. And you still care for that son. You still want to protect that son. You don't want to see harm come to your son. In any context, would you, as a father, look at that son and say, my son does not love me as I have commanded or expected. I'm going to then cover my son in gasoline and set them on fire. Does that seem like a moral outcome to you, a consequence to you?
I really don't think that's what God. I don't know. That's obviously
Depart
not
from
acceptable.
me, you who are cursed, into a lake of everlasting fire and damnation. That's a quote from the New Testament. It is a threat to those who do not follow God's command to love him. Love me or I'll burn you. A father setting a child on fire for noncompliance. Is that a moral model in any sense, including the God model?
Well, no, it's not. But there are other factors to be taken into consideration. And really, I want to say that I do believe that the way we express love towards God is through how we treat other people, because that's how Jesus made it clear we are to follow God, is through the second part of that commandment, which is to love our neighbor. So if you're someone who's not loving God, and that is expressed as harming people, yes, there should be consequences for that, and they should result in you suffer for causing suffering.
Disagree.
So you don't think
I'm
criminals should be punished for
I am not a huge
harming
I am
people?
not a huge fan of I am not a huge fan of punitive justice. No, I feel like society should be protected from people who've done crimes, and that the consequences they currently. That's a whole separate conversation.
It's a false equivalence model. Someone who has committed an illegal or a genuinely harmful act against another is not the same as I just don't love you. That's totally different. And I just
But it
don't
comes
love
from
you
not
means
loving someone.
I should suffer. To me, this sounds ridiculous, and it sounds like an abuse model. It sounds like domestic abuse.
Well, the not love is expressed and defined as not loving your fellow humans and causing harm to them. See, Jesus told us not to steal, not to murder, not to lie, not to do this, that, and the other. These are things that harm people, and Jesus didn't want us to do them. So if you're doing those things, and that's your expression of non-love, then yes, there should be consequences for that. And we can argue if the consequence is justified in its measure, but I don't think that.
Well,
How
you're
do you
talking
tie
about
those
earthly.
together? How
You're talking about
go
earthly
ahead,
punishment
Paul.
now. You're talking about earthly punishment now, which is fine. We can talk about that, but let's suppose that we have humans on Earth who are, because you seem to think that actions are the most important part here. There are non-Christian people who have had very, very good lives. They've loved people in an exemplary way. Their good far outweighed their bad. It seems like you want to score a system. So they've done all that stuff, but they didn't hear of Yahweh, or they believed in some other entity ahead of Yahweh, or just whatever, for whatever reason, they didn't do that first part. You seem to think that person is equally justified to have the suffering and the torture, right?
Actually, no. And that's the interesting part. I actually think that my opinion, nobody has a 100% accurate belief in God because we can't know everything about God.
Okay.
So everyone's going to be
So
wrong. Yep, go ahead.
So you're entirely on a karma system that you think that there is an afterlife, that there's an afterlife for everyone, whether they want an afterlife or not. Some have reward, some have torture or suffering, and that's entirely a karma system. So what did Jesus need to do? Why is he in that mix? Was he just here to tell us about the karma system?
Yes, actually, that is correct. Now, actually, in my opinion, this is going to sound a little bit strange. Well, here's some points I wanted to make. The Bible is not actually a Christian document inherently. Major Christian doctrines, such as the atonement, are not actually true. These are things that were invented by the early church much later. When you actually study what Christ taught, to me it seems like even if Christ hadn't come to earth to perfectly teach us the will of God, salvation would still be possible.
Right. This is actually what I'm trying to get to, is that it seems like in your model, even the notion of a creator God is superfluous. Is it not? It's basically, as long as we understood our biological empathy and acted on the biological empathy on a net positive basis, everything was going to play out as it should. So
yeah, you said
there's
net
no
positive.
Or whatever the scoring system is. If it's you have to get an A-, or I don't know what the score the you have to achieve, but whatever the achievable score that gets you in or out, doesn't seem like we needed a God for that, or any religion. It seems like you should be calling in. You should just be all out, just pitching empathy, and forget that first commandment entirely. The love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind. That doesn't seem like it's in play in your model. Is that right?
Well, it's necessary. In the reason Jesus gave it the way he did is because they're both part of the same. They're both two sides of the same coin. You're supposed to love God, but how do you do that?
No, you just
Through
told us.
loving
You
your
just
neighbor.
said that. You just said that we can all love our neighbors, and love a different God
That's
than
how
Yahweh.
Yeah, that's how you love God. That's how God. It isn't really so much God.
Okay, but so
like,
if I'm loving my
you must
neighbor,
worship.
or Seth is, that we might accidentally be honoring God when we are empathetic and acting in kind ways.
Yeah, actually, I believe that's correct. I believe that there are people
so then
who are
what's the point?
non-Christians.
Then what's the point of talking about is Christian? You said that you're intrigued by the call. Is Christianity worth believing? And it seems like this now entire argument is Christianity is unneeded. It's superfluous. Christianity, unless you're calling to say Christianity is not worth believing in, even in the pure form that you know and that the other billions of Christians don't know.
Well, Christianity is the perfect revelation of the truth. The other religions and philosophical systems aren't. So there are ways, but there is a chance that somebody could have accidentally came upon the truths of Christianity without Jesus. That is possible. But the point is, we have faith in Jesus because we believe he's the one who's teaching us the perfect system of salvation. And that's why Christianity is necessary, because not all religions are the same. Christianity is superior in its ethical moral system.
Do you think that the golden rule started with Jesus?
No, but there are other things that Jesus taught us that basically it's how do we express that rule perfectly. And, you can say, love your neighbor as you love yourself, which many people have, including before Jesus. But what does it actually look like? Do we have a model that represents and teaches that with authority as ontological reality, as opposed to just a philosophical speculation?
Those don't seem
See what
like
I'm saying?
necessities. Those don't seem like necessities. Those just seem like, Christianity dressed it up nicer.
Well, it may not be a necessity, but what I'm trying to say is that we have more certainty in this as being the truth of the salvation of our souls because of Jesus than we would if Jesus wasn't there and we didn't place our faith in Jesus. Like if you had put your faith in Muhammad, you're going to get an entirely different model of how to behave on this earth, and it's going to lead to condemnation because you're not expressing the behavior in the way that God wants it. And I know that Muslims are going to get offended by that, but that's just the way I see it. That's why Christianity, as opposed to the other religions, is worth.
You said love your neighbor as yourself is essentially the whole of the law. So I don't understand why a Muslim couldn't do that if they.
Because when Muhammad taught that, he also, the corollary is that his model of behavior is how Muslims are supposed. He was the model. I forget the word for it.
Certain Muslims can live entirely with, regardless of if they may have wrong theological beliefs, but they may still love their neighbors themselves.
Well, they wouldn't do that if they followed Muhammad, because I guess what I'm trying to say is that Jesus and Muhammad can both say love your neighbor, but how do we define that? How is it expressed? Jesus expressed it in a different way.
Seth, do you have anything else? I feel like we are now into some distinctions that make no difference to me.
No, I don't think I can add much beyond why couldn't a Muslim love his or her neighbor as themselves? I think that's totally reasonable. What Christ taught, that's actually a false statement. What the Gospels allege that a Christ might have taught or a Jesus might have taught, given that the earliest Gospel, Mark, was written full 4 decades after the supposed crucifixion and resurrection. There are no contemporary eyewitness reports of a Jesus Christ. The New Testament Gospels don't verify that there was even a Jesus, certainly not the God-man. So this idea that, well, what Jesus taught, I disagree with your present premise. In fact, the Gospels themselves disagree on how Jesus was born, how he lived, how he died, what he said, what he did. So I don't give really any. This is all kind of an empty calorie theological tap dance to me. What God wants, what Jesus says. And if I were to put 50 Anthonys in a room and have them discuss true Christianity, it would be Thunderdome. You'd agree with that, Anthony, right? The God who is not the author of confusion, has been so confusing that right now 2/3 of the planet worships somebody else or nobody at all. And if I was to take 50 people, true believers, who called themselves Christians, including you, and I put you guys in a room and I bought you lunch and I said, you hash it out, what are the chances all 50 of you would agree?
0, effectively.
The God who is not the author of confusion has a religion that has confused everybody in the room, right? Everybody's got a claim. Go ahead.
Let me ask you a question. When a math teacher gives an exam, does everyone get the right answer?
Well, are you saying that someone getting an answer wrong means that there is a provable right answer or a demonstrable right answer? What I'm saying to you is that there is no demonstrating what Christ taught, because no one has ever demonstrated Christ. And even the books that talk about Christ are not contemporary reporting. These things came along well after the supposed events took place. This is all conjecture. This is just, for all we know, mythology. So your foundation falls apart. I can't build anything on it, Anthony.
Okay, so we would have to go into discussion about whether mythicism is true, which is not why I called in, but I feel like it's falsifiable.
No. I'm not talking about historicism or mythicism. There might have been a real guy named Jesus that the Christ story was based on, right? So, and I don't know if there was a real Jesus walking around doing his thing or not, but we can say there has never been demonstrated, and there's no evidence for the miracles of Christ. We can't verify that any of that shit went down, right? Whatever document we have are the Bible book, starting with 79 CE, and then moving into around the first century CE. And then you've got the church bodies who are casting votes to decide which of the books are worthy of becoming canon. So now we're voting on what the word of God is. And I've got a squillion people who are apologists or armchair apologists saying that no, let me explain true Christianity. There's just not much the rest of us are going to be able to do with that. Okay?
All right. Well, I want to say that, just think about what I said. We didn't really actually get too much into the topic I wanted to talk about, which is that the modern Christianity, the modern institutions don't actually follow what Jesus taught. And I just encourage people to understand that. And when you're rejecting Christianity, make sure investigate what it really is. And if you're really rejecting, it's true at.
You should call into a Christian show to judge that, because we are not that's an internal critique for you guys to sort out.
That's also true. If you come across somebody in your circle who chooses not to love you, I hope you show them charity and a little bit of grace and humanity, and not operate with a punitive model that expects or demands suffering if someone doesn't love you in the way that you feel like you should be loved. Okay, Anthony?
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
And now I have to distance myself for a second. I don't think at no point was anyone voting for which books were in the New Testament. So no, and your dates kept getting later and later, and Bart Ehrman knows I know you, so I gotta
I was thinking, I think Mark was in the 70s CE, and that was the first gospel written.
That's what a scholar who doesn't sign a statement of faith would say. Yes, but the canonization of the Bible was not never voted upon, so that wasn't one.
It was never voted upon.
The canon was just the canon was the canon became accepted as it was more of an affirmation, but there was no show of hand type situation where people were like, this is in or this is out.
No, you're talking about a selection process, though. And we have Bible books, or supposed or alleged or ostensibly Bible books, that were not selected because they were not considered canon. So I would call that a selection process.
That's why I let it go when the caller was on. But then after, when we're doing our inside baseball things, then I'm just
just let me have it, Paul. Let me have it.
All right, you got it. You can have it. All right, fair enough.
I deserve it. Clarify the record. That's totally.
But fair. Anthony, he gave us no reason to think Christianity was needed. Weirdly, he just demonstrated that we don't need it.
I think I had this conversation with Matt. People are like, well, that's not true Christianity. We're seeing this with the progressives who are standing against the Christian nationalists. And they're saying, well, those people who want to take over government and they want to make Christianity the law of the land and oppress the non-believer, etc., to dominate. The dominionists, that's not what Jesus taught. That's not true Christianity. But then you've got the Christian nationalist, fundamentalist hardliners, and they're looking at all what they consider to be wishy-washy moderates, and they're like, well, that's not true Christianity. And nobody can agree on what true Christianity is. And so I think to myself, well, maybe they're all Christianity. They call themselves Christianity. They're just different flavors. It's like, is there Dutch chocolate, German chocolate, something else? But this idea that one is not legit and the other is. And I really, really think that this giving Jesus a pass on commandments but compulsory love is what Christopher Hitchens used to call it. That's an offensive idea. I always say, love me or else. is a domestic abuse model. And the idea that Anthony says, and if I don't love God, I am then deserving of suffering. I should suffer in some way. And the fact that he was just so kind of passive about it and so blithely accepting about it, that's a little disturbing to me.
To
I
the
have
extent
it
where he was
coming.
willing to extrapolate that to human children. It's like, oh yeah,
I mean,
your
if you're
kids
not
don't
going to
love
love
you, they should.
me, it's not my fault. It's just one of those things. I gave you the chance. I opened the door. I said, come in and love me. And you didn't. So whether you get hit by a train or whether you get set on fire or you get palsy, I mean, whatever, you're going to suffer. You didn't love me. By the way, my love for you is unconditional and perfect and pure. And I am omnibenevolent. It's just crazy. Philip or Philippe out of Austria? Which one is it? Forgive me.
What? Excuse me. Which one? What? I didn't understand the question.
Is it Philip or Philippe?
Oh, Philip. Yes.
Philip. Very kind. Thanks for calling.
Welcome.
You're on with Seth and Paulogia. What do you have for us today?
Yes. Thank you for taking my call. I'm pretty tired. I'm not that good in speaking English, so sorry if I don't make a whole lot of sense.
Doing fine.
But okay, so I was reading like an article by Curtis Yarvin. It's called How Dawkins Got Pwned, and it's about memetics basically, and how a meme must be constructed to cut it short, to take over the world and be super viral and successful and so on. And I thought it was a really interesting idea. And so I just played with this idea. What would I want to basically put into a meme like this? And I thought that something like the process of finding out what's true, something like, the themes of epistemology and so on, not without really promoting one epistemology or like only the scientific methods or anything, but just the process in itself. And the thing is that I think you would have to put this into a meme that has the structure of a religion to be as viral as possible. I mean, it just seemed to me that way after reading this article. And so I am basically trying to found this like pseudo religion. You could call it like the Flying Spaghetti Monster, just with like a serious content and maybe a better aesthetic to be more viral. And yes, I just it's a really complex concept and idea, and I will probably have to put it in like a book with like hundreds of pages and so on. So I'm not sure, is this clear until to this point, or am I making no sense at all?
Would you like me to restate this, Paul, and maybe see if you and I are both tracking in the same way? What I'm hearing is that if you want to share an idea, and I'll just call it a shareable idea instead of a meme, you invoked memetics, this idea that we want ideas to go viral in our hyper-connected world. And ideas that are framed religiously are very often the ones that catch fire and are seen and noticed and even embraced by the most people. And so maybe if we are trying to promote certain ideas, to frame them somehow religiously, even tongue in cheek, even not a supernatural religion, but maybe a secular religion, using a religious model for memeing our ideas to the world might be the best way to get those ideas out there. Is that a fair restatement of what you were saying?
Oh yeah, that's perfect, I think. So yes, thanks. And so what I was writing, or what I was telling the call screener, and he thought that I was trying to prank you maybe, or he at least asked me that. But what I told him was that I was like searching for tips for basically a pseudo fake religion to write a book about it, and I'm basically searching for other authors who could share a different perspective on this entire
Well,
subject
Philip,
matter.
hey,
For
wait a
example,
minute.
yes.
Look, what ideas are you wanting to share? Because just creating a pseudo fake religion that sounds like what? You're just trying to sell books, get attention, stir the pot. But if you're talking about using a religious model, whatever that is, to try to weaponize the meme verse to get your ideas out, what ideas do you want to share?
Yes, the idea is basically just the process. Uh, the idea is basically just, and I know this is pretty abstract, but the process of figuring out things. So it's basically like, like ontology, epistemology, and methodology, the philosophy of science, science, and so on. But those things just as, in a sense, suggestions, because I don't really want to impose one epistemology. I would leave it open in the sense that if you find a new epistemology which is sound and if you can demonstrate that it works, you could also include it into the canon of this pseudo religion. So it would basically just be I guess, introductory textbook at the end in philosophy of science. But
Would not the followers
formulated.
of this religion fail? Because the principles you're teaching would be to be able to sniff out what is true and identify what's false and get rid of the false things. And so if you are going to layer that message with false things, all successful members of your religion will reject your religion, right?
No, because where are the false things? I wouldn't include any things that I would consider false, and if they are
okay,
false,
so then
they would just be, yes.
So then, do you think that communication tactics are inherently religious? That there are because when I heard you say I wanted to make a religion, I heard that you wanted to wrap it in a mythology, or that you wanted to wrap it in consequences. If instead what you were saying are there is communication tactics that religions use that you would also like to use, do you think that there is a form of communication that only exists for religious and not for secular purposes?
Well, I mean, it's so hard because I'm not really sure what definition of religion you're using. But I mean, I think that there are enough similarities between something like, I mean, for example, the flying spaghetti monster and so on. I know there's like also a book about it and so on. Or maybe you could compare it with modern Satanism, right? So modern Satanism, I think, has enough similarities with like traditional religions, structurally speaking, to call it something like a secular religion. So yes, something in something like that, but the devil is in the detail. Yeah. Is that helpful as an explanation? Or
right. So the flying spaghetti monster is as a parody is definitely adding in things that the adherents know that are false and that they're in on the joke. And so it's not so much it's a parody reflection. It's an argument ad absurdum, right, of the other side. So I think you're better off when you talk about this to go to the Satanism model, because as I understand it, at least large swaths of Satanism do not accept that there is a supernatural or a being named Satan, and that they are using a controversial label rather than believing in any kind of supernatural. So again, I would say that is a communication strategy rather than a religion. What definition of religion are you using? What do you want to bring from religion and add to your ideas in order to make it a palpable thing that more people accept? What let me go back to you. What do you mean by religion, Philip?
I mean, I have not a perfect definition at hand, but I would say, for example, with modern Satanism, that they are using, for example, symbols, images, and also a community structure. And also, I mean, you can have secular satanic masses where you are basically, you know, making something like a parody version of traditional Christian mass. And I think there are a lot of benefits in this religious type behavior that are also secular at the same time. But I don't have a ready-made definition of religion, to be honest. It would, yeah, it's hard. I don't have it on the top of my head.
Your question a few minutes ago was, what tips do you have? And I guess my tip would be, this sounds like a terrible idea. I feel like if teaching people to, if what you want to teach them is to reject false things and accept true things, that
yes,
if you want to add any false things to that message, you are merely undermining your message and giving people a reason to doubt it and become suspicious of it. If what you mean is just clever marketing, then okay. Then you can look to your heroes of marketing. Look to Apple, look to Nike, look to Michael Jordan, look to all the successful marketing endeavors that have had nothing to do with Christianity, or look at Carl Sagan and his popularization of some of these notions and ideas. Those are just marketing tactics at this point, then, as opposed to bringing in elements of religion. Now, that was a marketing tact of the Satanic Church, right? Was because they wanted to create this parody and they thought it would resonate well. But that's not adding parts of religion that maybe it is. Maybe that's parsing hairs. But then I would say, what's the matter with, maybe you should just piggyback on what the Church of Satan is doing. Anyway, that was my thoughts. This doesn't sound like a great idea, other than improved marketing is good. Seth, I will hand it back to you.
Thanks for the call, Philip.
To me, or
much appreciated.
All right. Okay. Thanks. And I think this was actually pretty interesting. So thank you, and goodbye then.
All right.
Goodbye. Too abstract for me. Too bizarre for me. I can't participate. Forgive the dogs. This is Linus. This is my son. I normally try to get in front of the dogs barking. I know it's coming when the garage door goes up. Natalie comes home, and I normally know it's about to happen, so I can hit the mute button on the microphone. That was unexpected. So they literally have just about scared me out of my chair whenever they both, because they, Linus, I don't know if you can tell by looking at him, he is a descendant of the wolf. He's very, very, very ferocious. And he has no idea that he's 7 pounds. So as we walk down the street together, we go out on multiple walks a day, and he'll see like an Irish wolfhound, or some big beast of a muscular dog. Put him down. It's on. Like,
most
if
importantly,
we were to be at the dog park. Go ahead.
If Linus acts unloving, I hope that you punish and torment them and cause them to suffer.
If for some
reason, as a good father, that's what a good father would do.
He wasn't affectionate to me, and there was no connect. And he loved Natalie, but he did not love me. No, I would not make him suffer, because I am all just, and that's the right and moral thing to do. That's really a good point. So anyway, it's funny. I don't know about yours. Do you talk about your animals a lot on your channel?
Because I do. Yeah,
we have
Eagle, and my regular on my show. My Eagle Bella is often on the show. Yeah,
I get so much everywhere I go. How's Linus? How's Gracie? How's Cat? Everywhere I go, I've taken them on the not Cat, but I've taken the dogs on the road with me. I actually have done a few speaking engagements that were drivable, and Natalie was there, and we'll have the dog beds on the book table, so the dogs are up there. And I finally got to the point where I put a web page up. So if you go to sethandrews.com, there's a web page with just pictures and videos of the dogs. I'm such a pushover. I like dogs better than some people. You know, does anyone else feel that in this world?
Absolutely.
Dogs better than some people. By the way, a huge thanks out to Stephanie Helms, who is our call screener. I think Philip had accidentally referred to Stephanie as a he, but Stephanie is back there managing, helping us to keep the puck in play. Really, the
Always
person
amazing at her
behind
job.
Yeah. More than mere mortal woman. It's true.
Mhm.
I've got, wow, I want to make sure I'm saying this one right, and I'm going to screw it up. Is it Baptiste out of France? Pronouns he, him. Are you there?
Yeah. In France, we say Baptiste, not Baptiste like Southern Baptist. We don't say the P letter. Okay.
It's musical when you say it. It's an abomination when I try it. Please forgive me. Go ahead. You've got a comment or question for the show. Are we on speaker?
Yeah, sorry, I have only my camera microphone. You can mute me anytime when you have some echo.
Okay, I'm going to probably have you speak a little softer and move a little more close to your microphone on the camera. Would that be all right?
Okay. Is it better now? I can turn.
That's a little bit better. Okay, go ahead. Comment or question.
So it's kind of a question, but I don't know if it's due to cultural difference or if it was actually a provocation. But I'm working from a big American company worldwide, etc. And basically, the context is they have bought a French company, my company, and another one in Spain. And we are basically lay country for the most part. And basically, we had the context is we have a big meeting with the CEO, the quarterly meeting, and people have some concern because they might lose their previous company culture with the fusion. And the guy answers this way, and it was, okay, guy, I know you have separate companies, but now you are all in the same church, and you better do your duty. And yeah, as a French, I don't know if it's provocation, like the guy say, you better behave like you are in religion, and that's it. Because I have other American colleagues, and they never use that expression. They said like you are all in the same boat or stuff like that. But mentioning church like this in an official meeting, I mean, if I was working for a French company, I would have filed a complaint to HR. And if it was another executive, I would have done so. But since it's the CEO, I don't. I fear for my job. I mean, but okay. I don't know. And so,
if I may,
hello?
I'm going to. You have a lovely, wonderful voice and accent, but it's hard for me to hear everything, especially using the connection that we have. Let me make sure that I'm understanding before we proceed. There's a company meeting with the CEO of the corporation, and there was a statement made that we are acting like a church. We are all going to be of a certain religion. Was I hearing that?
It was like you were separate companies before, and now you are in the same church. Normally, you would say that I think you are in the same boat, but it's specific to church, and like you have to do your duty, your chore. The last part, I'm not sure, but the part like you are in a church, and I mean, in France, you are not allowed. It's not relevant. It's shocking. I don't know if in the US.
Okay, people, so instead of saying we're all on the same team or we're all in the same boat, the metaphor that he used was we're now all in the same church. And you are concerned that metaphor is perhaps an inappropriate one, a religious metaphor. Is that more accurate?
Yes, and he also say sorry for I forgot to say that. Sorry for atheist friends, but you are in the same church, so you have to do your duty. And how is that relevant to mention that? And by the way, most of the people in the team, they are not atheists, but lay people. In France, you are expected to be lay at work. You not mention. You have the right to have a religion, but you are not supposed to like mention it publicly and have chat openly like that. And yeah.
This is happening in what part of the world? I'm sorry, there's a little bit of a delay, but I want to make sure that I'm maintaining momentum, so I am going to interrupt. In which country are we operating? In which country are we referencing this event?
France.
Okay, in France. I'm not an HR specialist. I think private corporations can probably frame it any way they want. I have heard the church metaphor used in ways that are not necessarily religious. I haven't been offended by it. Are they in some way mandating religious behaviors beyond the metaphor of, hey, you're all part of the same church? Anything more intense than that?
Not sure of that, but it was more like, basically, you answered the question. I didn't know if it was like a cultural difference or like a fact. And a French CEO, he would not use that expression because he would know that people would be pissed. Sorry for the bad language, but people will not be happy with that expression. But since he's American, I was shocked at the time, but I was processing and I didn't know if it was like a normal thing to say in the US. So anyway, deal with it. You're working for a US company or...
I haven't, I haven't heard that metaphor used. Usually it's we're all on the same team. We're all in the same boat. As many might disagree, I wouldn't worry about it. I mean, if they're doing overtly religious things, they as a private corporation may have the right to do much of that stuff. But if somebody says, oh, we're all part of the, this is now your church or whatever, if somebody was to do that in a meeting, I might wince a bit, but I doubt I'd raise a stink over it. I probably wouldn't go as far as to contact HR. Now, if someone was promoting a specific religious belief, or more appropriately or more accurately, if they were discriminating against those of other religions or none, that type of thing is definitely an HR issue. Paulogia, do you have any thoughts on this?
I think I just echo your sentiment. I think it might have been someone who I've moved to different parts of the country and other countries as well. I've lived in different regions, and there's oftentimes I need to give the benefit of the doubt that there's a regional expression. As I think that's why you're calling. Is this a regional expression? It's not one that I'm familiar with, but it sure sounds like he was using it as a synonym for, as you said, or on the same team or in the same boat. And just to echo what Seth said, unless they are extending that metaphor into reality, that may well have even just been a slip of the tongue, and he may have even meant to say in the same boat. So it's possible. So I think it's probably not. Probably I wouldn't call him out on it. If you wanted to ask around and say, hey, is this a common expression? If it bothers you, but I think within the terms of employ, if you like the job, otherwise, no, I wouldn't consider this even to be a yellow flag. I think it was just a weirdly worded way of saying we're on the same team. That's my take.
Okay. Thank you for the info. And by the way, that's why I was calling, because I didn't know. I don't want to feel a complaint to HR or something like that without knowing if it's me because it's a cultural difference, regional difference, or yeah. So I think
it was weird, but not out of bounds. Yeah.
Okay.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much for the call from across the ocean. Great to speak with you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
There's a
I was
language that is so lovely when spoken well, and
I was amused
I
that
just
he's when he said pissed. Where I'm from, when someone says a word that they think maybe they shouldn't use, they say "Pardon my French." Is something that you would, and so he's so I was anticipating he was going to say "Pardon my French" when he said that. But anyway, speaking
it's
of
funny
regional
when
things to say,
I had done a speaking event in the Netherlands 2018, I believe, and Natalie and I decided to tack on a week. And so we landed in London, and then we went to Paris, and then we went to Bruges, and then finally up to Amsterdam. But when we were in France, we were warned, like, they hate Americans. And I don't know if that's true or not. I have no idea. I'm just telling you what people told us, right? And this was during the height of Trumpistan. And everybody's like, they hate Americans. But what they specifically really, really dislike is when you don't try. If you expect everyone's going to speak in English and you're not attempting to at least, say some things in French as best you can to say, look, I'm trying to communicate that. And so as we would go to a coffee shop or a place to have dinner, or we'd be asking questions, we were desperately trying to show that we organically we really respect and are so appreciative of you, and we're so glad to be here, and we're trying our best. Please forgive our ignorance. And honestly, the people we met were absolutely lovely. They were absolutely lovely, but I was struck by the nuance of French more than Spanish and some others. I thought to be able to wrap your tongue around the nuances and the music of the language, it's just remarkable and so lovely when spoken well. And so it brought back memories to hear that call. Anyway,
I can
was just
assure you
going
that the same is not true in Quebec, where they speak in Quebec, the province here, where they speak predominantly French. They do not appreciate when you try. Shannon,
Oh, really?
Shannon and I went on vacation we went on vacation there, I think it was last summer, and we pulled up to a drive-through. It was just one example, and Shannon, who speaks French very lovely, in my opinion, she says bonjour she said it much better than I did, and literally it was like there was a silence, and they said, "Let me get my manager," and that was the only English. It was literally like, "Don't speak to us in French anymore." Yeah, they didn't appreciate our terrible effort.
From a first world, like we may be the only first world country that only has one language, and there's this really sad, pathetic expectation that we speak American here in this country. That's
Right.
the idea. Everybody needs to speak English, and when we travel around the world, there are many who have that expectation. Well, I'm an American, and so you're going to speak in English to me. Meanwhile, we went to Amsterdam. And I think it's normal to speak 2 or even 3 languages. You can switch from one to the other. And it was remarkable. And I had real envy that I didn't grow up in a culture where being bi or even trilingual was just normal. I feel like I got cheated. But I have been reading about, is it Google? There's someone who's making earbuds that are linked to an app on your phone that can translate languages in real time. So let's say I'm at the coffee shop.
ChatGPT was just demonstrating this. I was just saying ChatGPT at their last meeting like 2 weeks ago. They were literally demonstrating this on stage. They had an Italian speaker and an English speaker, and it was just happening live on stage. It's amazing. And Google Translate does similar. When we were in Quebec, I was using Google Translate to literally say the words I'd want, and then it would say the opposite. It's crazy times we live in.
In a pinch, if I am lost, if I'm desperate to find my hotel, or if I need help in some way, to be able to break the language barrier instantly. Overall, I worry that it might cause us to not actually learn the language. I'm not sure. I think maybe actually hearing the translations and maybe seeing the text of those translations might better introduce us to the languages. But how much more connected would our world be if we didn't have the language blockades between us. I think it's remarkable technology. I'm very excited.
You want a real babblefish. That's what you want.
That's what I want, to just stick it in your ear and immediate. Imagine going back in time and trying to explain this technology to people 200 years ago, right? To say this will be possible. There's so much precursory stuff you would have to explain just before you got to the ear translator, right? All right, first we got to start with electricity before you get to the phone and the internet and AI and search engines. And I can't even. What's that line? Any advanced technology I'm trying to remember. Is the one that says it is indistinguishable from magic?
I think indistinguishable from magic. Yeah, I think that's the one.
Yeah.
I can also assure you, as someone who's gone on and sent many people on mission trips from Canada, we absolutely put Canadian flags on every kid so that no one thinks they're American overseas, because then that's something we actively try and avoid, because there's a stigma.
Depending on how things roll at the end of 2024, I might be seeking asylum. I might call and say, "Do you have a spot on your couch?"
Absolutely,
the dogs and the cat. Okay, I may just say it. Just fill out the paperwork and tell me where to crawl under the barbed wire. And
as long as you're not a felon,
it looks like
we'll let people in who aren't felons. Okay, all right.
Not a felon. I am squeaky
Doesn't matter.
clean.
1 count or 34 doesn't matter.
There's a little bit of room on the switchboard if you would like to dial in quickly. I've got Dak out of California. Pronouns he, him. Dak, did I say it right?
Close enough. It's usually pronounced Dak. Long story behind that. I'm a linguist, so I said it's usually pronounced Doc. But if you want to pronounce it Dak, that's fine.
Say it again to make sure that I hear it. We've got a distorted connection.
Doc,
So I'm going to back you off your microphone just a little bit. Hang on. I'm going to back you off your mic just a little bit and say it again for me. Go ahead.
Okay. Let's see. If I hold the phone like this, can you hear me better now?
Much better. What's your name?
Okay. Like as I was saying, it's usually pronounced Doc. I'm a linguist, so there's a long story behind that. But a lot of people end up misspelling it DOC, and then they find out it's actually it's an acronym for my full name.
Thank you for your patience with me as I try to set things up in advance of our conversation. What do you have for us? Comment or question?
Well, I wanted to address the question that was asked in the title of the show, and specifically the phrasing of believing in, because that's something that gets used so many different ways. And I'm wondering, was there a specific meaning intended when that was written? Do you happen to know?
When what was written?
The title of the show is Christianity Worth Believing In. So that is something that we have some great behind the scenes people at the line, and they like to come up with some provocative titles for each episode. But having a little bit, I'm not sure which member of our team created that and had that in. Oh, all right. But did you have something in mind? I think we're mainly trying to provoke. We like for someone who professes to believe to bring their own definition, just like we wouldn't define who is a real Muslim or who is a real Christian. We prefer for someone who professes for that to bring their religion, their definition with them. So you tell us what you mean by believe, and we'll roll with it.
Okay, well, actually, I was expecting that would be pretty much your answer, and I'm hoping that maybe I can help with encouraging some people to do what you just said by, maybe talking about some of the different things that it can mean. Me, I generally try to avoid using believe in or believing in because of the fact that it can mean so many different things, and it often gets used intentionally or unintentionally to conflate things that are very different from each other.
Unfortunately, that's true of most of the words.
I understand.
So, go ahead.
You can tell Paul and I
wouldn't
both
say it's
use
true
the
of
hosting.
most. I wouldn't say it's true of
Right.
most, but it is true of certain ones. There's a lot of different things that end up that way, and religion is notorious for grabbing those things and making them even worse.
So
And
let
I
me
don't
make
think
sure I'm
most religious
understanding.
people would disagree with me on that. What they disagree with me on is that they're religious. Most of them that I've met would frame it some other way, because most religious people that I've met don't really like religion.
Okay, I'm coming back.
Does that make sense?
Hang on. I'm coming back to that. Is your issue with the
Okay.
use of believe, like if someone says, well, I'm not religious, or I'm not a creationist, I believe in evolution. And they say that colloquially, but wow. But the more accurate way to phrase it would be, I accept the evidence for evolution. I hold to that position based on the evidence.
That's
So
clearer.
someone can't make the false equivalence, claim that, well, you are believing in one thing the way you would believe in another. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's much clearer. I also would like to point out a distinction between believe and believe in. That those are believe is a lot more straightforward and a lot more narrow in its usage than believe in. For example, if someone says they believe something exists, that's pretty straightforward what it is they mean by that. But if they say they believe in the existence of something, a lot of times that doesn't actually mean they believe it exists. It means, for example, that they think the existence would be a good thing, or they think the existence is something that they'd like to believe, or something along those lines. There's a lot of ways that can be taken, and a lot of ways that it can be meant.
So
So
is there a way
I
to go?
believe. Eva, go. Hang on. I'm almost done, Paul, and then I'm going to
Do it.
shut up, and it's all yours. So I believe evolution is supported by the evidence, and I believe in evolution are different claims.
Those are very different claims, yes. They may be meant the same way, and by some people they definitely are meant the same way, but how they end up being taken can be quite different.
So given that we, the three of us, are not going to change the way people speak, when you called in, did you have something in mind other than to warn people in general that people are imprecise with language? Or did you, which is why I loved that you asked, what did we mean by it? And that is something I very much encourage people to do, is to define terms before they get into a conversation. Was that the extent of what you wanted to say today, or did you have something more than just an awareness of ambiguity?
I've got a whole lot more, but it's a question of how much time you want to spend on an atheist, because I know you got theist callers waiting, and as I said, my main thing is to encourage people to call in and talk about what they mean by such things, and maybe try to find another way to word what they mean, rather than assuming someone's going to understand their meaning when they use such a phrase. And yes, we actually can affect the way people choose to speak if we can make it clear to them that saying something one way will have a very different effect than saying it another way. These aren't things I'm waiting.
Yeah, I
Go
didn't
ahead.
mean to belittle. I didn't mean to belittle that effort. I'm sorry, I may have sounded as though I was.
Right.
But I'm very much with you. I think verbiage is important, and I do make strides on my channel to try to use the most precise language possible and to model that as best I can. Absolutely. And that's why I would typically use
encourage that, but and I would like to encourage that. But at the same time, I don't want to tell someone how to talk. I mean, that is up to them to decide. But yes, by all means, if they can communicate more clearly by choosing their phrasage carefully in situations where they would like to communicate more clearly, I'd definitely like to encourage that. And I would like to point out that if they use the phrase "believe in" and they're speaking to somebody who doesn't share their belief system, there's a very good chance that phrase is going to be misunderstood.
Okay. I know, and that's why I typically use intellectual assent is often the phrase that I will use instead of believe, for example. So, and I think in general, I think you're right. We try and model. I think you're right that the strategy is to model it, and that hopefully people will, much like a Christian would do when they say, hey, we're going to live a lifestyle in such a way that people want to ask us, hey, what's different about our life? No, I think you're pedantically telling people that they're using a word incorrectly or using a word in a way we don't want to use is the most boring conversation, I think, around. Definitional conversations are boring. But yes, as long as we're charitable to others and modeling it as best we can, I'm on board with that.
It might be somewhat pedantic, or it might seem somewhat pedantic and perhaps not be, but if I can make a clarification, for example, if someone says that they believe in something and they mean they believe it is good, but someone else takes it to mean they believe it is true, and they hear enough people saying they believe in that thing to think that all these other people believe it's true, they may take that as testimony that it's true, and what the people are really saying is they have wishful thinking. And and also whether something is true or real aren't necessarily the same thing. For example,
is that not what I said? The best first practice is to ask someone what they mean by it.
Yes.
Again, like yes. So that's so.
But when the person's speaking, if they can also think to clarify. My point is, when someone's speaking, if they can think to clarify in advance, not everyone is going to think to ask. So, like as an example, if someone were to lie to you, you might think that lie is real, but not think that it's true or that it's good. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I'm not certain that we are adding. I'm not certain we're bringing new information to the conversation at this point. Yeah, that's all I'm saying.
Then I should let you go. I should let you go and let other people call in and respond to this, or people that are on hold waiting respond to this and to other things that have been said on the show. And I hope I've contributed something valuable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I like to, managed to be pedantic about about pedantry was credit that to producer.
I think conversations are often about momentum, right? Mm-hmm. I've been doing communication for a long time, and I am interested in being accurate. I'm interested in clarity of language, but I really believe that these conversations are about momentum. And I think you can infer intent. You can get what somebody means when they say the word believe in a conversation without hitting the brakes, tripping on that pebble, stopping everything and say, well, I think what you mean is that you accept for this reason. There might be a moment to have that conversation, but most of what I heard was we're going to get caught on the syllables, even though we may understand what they mean in the first place. I just don't think that's an effective way to engage other people. We in the atheist culture, as creatures of reason and hopefully of accuracy, which is what we want to be, we get caught on a lot of dumb shit. This is related, but not directly, but it's a cousin of this kind of thing. It's like when you sneeze and somebody says, bless you. And you're like, well, I don't believe in blessings because I don't hold to the super, literally someone's intent was just bless you. I acknowledge you. It's something people do. Have a blessed day. You're like, well, I don't believe in supernatural blessings, people. Or somebody, I'm an atheist and occasionally will say an expression like, oh, thank God. It just falls out of my mouth. It's part of the popular culture. It doesn't mean I believe in a deity, and people will stop and get caught. And I think, at some point, these all become momentum killers. You know what I'm saying? You just cannot get trip on every single pebble. I don't know. Am I giving too much latitude to language, Paulogia? What do you think?
No, not at all. And it very much depends on the nature of a conversation as well, of course, right? Like a lot of times people are looking the conversation you're having, are you arguing ideas in a more formal debate type notion where this
Yeah.
clarity is going to be very important for later nuance, or is this person trying to share an emotion with you so that you can empathize with each other and or share a moment of some kind? Yes, then you're absolutely wrecking the moment. I'm with you. There's a time for everything. In everything there's a season. And
I think it's important to define terms in that context. And I think you're absolutely right. And I appreciate you drawing a big circle around that. If we're getting into the arena of ideas, having theological, philosophical discussions based on our values or how we see the world, I think we have to be able to lay out terms and say, what do you mean by that? And that's done on shows like yours and mine and The Line and so many others. But in everyday conversations, I get a little bit frustrated with how quickly we will stop. And because we kind of come off like it's just pedantic and we kind of come off a little asshole-ish. I think, a little superior.
Well, I think more importantly is the notion, which I heard you do several times in these calls, where you're essentially doing a version of steel manning, where you're repeating back, I'm going to rephrase what I heard you say. Is this what you meant? Is a much kinder, more constructive, forward momentum way of having this conversation of saying, hey, when you said believe it, did you mean blah, blah, blah? And they'll say, yeah, and we can move on. I think you modeled that several times throughout this show, and so I appreciate it.
Some of that is practical because we've got poor connections, but I feel like if I can restate what somebody's position is to make sure we're on the same level, we're talking about the same thing, it allows us to take the next steps in security, and it also makes our callers feel understood. Like, oh, they understand what I'm trying to say. And I think that's pretty important. Granted, there have been some calls that I have no idea what the hell they were talking about. Just like, what? What are you talking about? Some people who call these call-in shows who spin off into that apologetics word salad that I can't even keep it straight. It's not even a cloud to ground lightning bolt. They just take every stream on the way up or down, and I lose my mind. And then there aren't enough notes in the world, for a guy like me. It looks like we've covered everybody who was called into the broadcast, which means today we're going to finish just a little bit early. Paul, what are you working on these days? Anything special, shows, broadcast, anything in your queue? Because I'd like people to be able to know about it and perhaps find you on your own channel.
Yeah, no, I always have lots of videos going on. Most recently, I've been doing some couple of videos about whether Jesus was a failed apocalyptic prophet. So if that's the kind of pedantic conversation you would like to have, so you can definitely check out my videos there. Yes.
Hang on. Is this like the C.S. Lewis thing? Is Jesus lunatic, liar, or Lord? Is that are those the waters
Not exactly.
you're wading into?
So it's more in the matter of if you accept that some of the writings of Jesus were, as are attributed to him, were his. So there's sayings like, some among you will not taste death until you see the kingdom coming in power, or this generation will not pass away. So there's some of these phrases, like in Mark 13, a lot of them appear, where Jesus is making some prophetic notions, prophetic proclamations that on their face sure seem like they didn't come true, because it sure seems like all the disciples died before the kingdom came with power, for example. And so I like to look at there's different apologetic ways of getting around this, because clearly Jesus hasn't come back. Was Jesus talking about a future generation? Was Jesus talking about the kind of prophecy where it's contingent, where, if you behave well, Jesus will come back soon, but if you behave poorly, it's going to take 2,000 years? Or a third option is often this partial, the disciples saw the resurrection, so they saw the start of the kingdom coming with power, even though it's going to take 2,000 years. So it's in the weeds as my channel often is, on accepting the Christian notions as best I can and discussing whether or not it makes sense. So that's what I was talking about. The Liar Lunatic Lord thing, I also have videos on that, but I, of course, think you and I both ascribe to option B. Option D, other,
Yeah.
is the thing we would go with. So
interesting how the apologists can't even agree on Christ's return. You'd mentioned that Jesus told his disciples, there are some among you who shall not taste death. And then all of those people died. And there are some, I ran into somebody who was criticizing a chapter in my book as I was talking about the apocalypse. And they're like, well, the reason people are trying to prevent the end times, which is weird, because if you look at hardline Christianity, it's a fear culture. Everybody's coming for them, right? The Bible says no weapon formed against you shall prosper, right? God is your shield and your strength. No harm is going to come to you. You're a child of God. You know, who do not fear those who will kill the body, because no one can kill your soul or spirit in Christ Jesus. And if you look at these people, they're always in freak out mode. Everybody's coming for them, whether it's the socialists or the immigrants or the trans people or, you know, the Democrat. I mean, who are they? They've got villains all over, and they're always wigging out. And I think to myself, they're always wigging about the Antichrist coming. This is the end of times, and we must be vigilant. And I'm thinking, why are you not jumping up and down and having a parade? Because this is what you want. The end time, this is a precursor to you going to the most joyous, happy, secure, safe, wonderful, amazing, colorful, loving place beyond imagination. You will be reunited with everyone you've ever loved and lost. You're going to have mansions and jewels in your crown and so much good. Why are you not excited? Why are you not ready for the world to end? And I heard an apologist the other day, and they said, well, the reason we want to stave off the end times is because we need time to make sure more people hear about Jesus. Well, that's never going to happen. Like, there will always be somebody on the earth. And then there was yet another one who said that Christ will only return when everyone has heard, which is a variation on the same thing. And I find that interesting. So they've got to set up a model where Christ will never actually arrive, and somehow it's part of God's master plan. I just spun off into oblivion there.
Well, I was just saying, it's equally scary, though. There are Christians, though, that are the reverse, that very much want to bring about to the end.
Yeah.
And they vote based on that because they think certain things need to happen in the Middle East. And so they base their entirety of their support and their voting block based on trying to make certain prophecies happen. And that's just this. I actually prefer the people who are the Christians who are just willing to admit, yeah, this might not ever happen, as opposed to the ones trying to make it happen. That's, I guess.
It's like blanket support for Israel. Talk about messy, right? People want this to be an A-B choice to fit it into a box. And I'm like, how do you fit a conflict of this depth and breadth into a box? Because it simply does not. And yet many people here, especially in the United States, the Zionists have this idea that Israel must be established and protected in advance of the return of Jesus Christ, because this is the Holy Land. And many believe that that is where Christ will appear first. And so by that standard, Israel can do whatever it wants. The military can go and they can carpet bomb schools and hospitals, and they can destroy lives, and they can wreak havoc, and they can mass murder. And I support, and they have the bumper stickers and the t-shirts and the placards and the pins that they say, I stand with Israel. What they're saying is, I stand with Israel no matter what Israel does, which is a get out of thinking free card, apparently. And they fit into your model.
You said the loud part loud. You said the quiet part loud. That's what I was trying not to say. But yes, that's you exactly articulated my concern.
Okay, a quick reminder, 7 o'clock tonight, it's the After Dark broadcast. Matt Dillahunty, Aron Ra, two forces of nature in the same place. Matter, antimatter will collide. The universe may explode, and you want to be there for that. Then tomorrow night, 6 o'clock, Skeptalk, John Gleason and Aaron Adair. Tuesday night, it's Chewed Gum. Arden and Stacy are going to just knock it out of the park as they always do. Wednesday night's going to be the Hang Up. Matt is back with Mandisa Thomas. Thursday, the Transatlantic Call-In Show, Arden and Josie. And there's always some good stuff happening on this channel. I'm thankful for the chance to come in and play along with everybody else. It's an honor to share a stream with Paul. I'm a fan, Paul. I just love your attitude. I love your mind. I think you're doing a lot of very important work, and I appreciate your generosity with people. You engage the apologist, but when you engage, you're engaging with the larger temperature of caring about people. You want truth to win out, or you want the debunked ideas to be debunked because you want to, how did the caller say it? We want to maximize pleasure and minimize harm. Maybe you're doing God's good work, Paul. I'm just
Seth, everything as I said before, if it weren't for your channel, there would be no Paulogia. So I appreciate so much.
That's not true.
Anytime to talk with you. Well, you gave
that's not true.
So I will say you lent what that one caller was talking about was we need to, where it was like the last caller who was talking about how you have to give people words. You gave vocabulary to my newfound doubt. You were very important to me that way. So I always, and then I've now learned to just love you as a person, and both on and off camera. So anytime we get to hang out, I'm there.
So thankful that everybody was here with us. Thanks for watching and listening to the Sunday Show on the Line. And we'll see you back here next time. Be safe, be well, be good. How do we do, I wonder?
This is where Shannon likes to say sentences to see which words will get cut off or not. When will it end? Will
Shannon should always be cut off. Always.
That's not a good way to live in my house. Bad advice.